A mother bear trusted him with her cubs. What happened next will leave you speechless. The forest was quiet that morning, wrapped in a mist that clung to the ground like a living veil. Daniel, a ranger known for spending long stretches of time alone in the wilderness, walked the familiar trail that led deeper into the valley. He carried little more than a pack of dried rations, his rifle slung across his shoulder, not for hunting, but for protection. It was then, as the mist began to lift, that he saw them. A mother bear, massive and commanding, stood in a small clearing. At her paws, 3 tiny cubs tumbled and wrestled clumsily in the grass. Daniel froze instantly. Every instinct told him to back away, to avoid eye contact, to respect the unspoken rule: never get close to a mother and her cubs. She was one of the most dangerous animals he could possibly encounter. But what struck him was not her size or her strength, it was her eyes. Instead of charging or growling, the mother bear simply looked at him. Her gaze was steady, almost thoughtful, as if she was measuring something unseen. The cubs, oblivious to the danger, continued to play, their squeals carrying through the morning air. Daniel's breath caught. He had been in the forest long enough to know this wasn't normal. Wild animals were creatures of instinct, especially bears. Yet this mother didn't move to protect her cubs, nor did she run away. She just stood there, holding his gaze. Minutes passed like hours. Slowly, Daniel lowered his eyes, then took a step back. He expected her to retreat with her cubs. Instead, she surprised him even more. The mother bear nudged one of the cubs gently toward him. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to make Daniel's heart race. It was as if she was daring him, or perhaps, trusting him. Daniel couldn't shake the image of that encounter. Even after he returned to his cabin later that day, the memory of the mother bear's calm stare followed him. It wasn't fear that filled him, it was confusion. Why hadn't she attacked? Why had she pushed her cub closer instead of shielding it? The next morning, as dawn lit the treetops, Daniel stepped outside with a kettle of boiling water for tea. That's when he saw movement at the tree line. His breath caught. The bear family was back. The mother stood tall, her cubs tumbling at her feet. She wasn't aggressive, nor did she seem startled by Daniel's presence. Instead, she settled onto her haunches and watched him with that same unblinking intensity. For hours, they remained like that, Daniel pretending to go about his chores, the bears lingering nearby. It was almost as if she was waiting. On the 3rd day, Daniel made a choice. From his cabin, he carried a small portion of food, some dried fruit and bread. His hands trembled slightly as he set it down on a flat stone halfway between himself and the tree line. Then he stepped back, heart pounding. The cubs sniffed the air immediately, their noses twitching. One began to waddle toward the food, but the mother blocked its path. She turned her massive head toward Daniel, eyes narrowing. For a long moment, he thought he had overstepped. But then, in a movement that seemed almost deliberate, she lowered her head and gave a low rumble, not a warning but something softer. The cubs were allowed to approach. They devoured the offering clumsily, crumbs sticking to their fur. Daniel stood perfectly still, stunned at what was unfolding before his eyes. The mother bear had accepted his gift. More than that, she had allowed her cubs to take food from his hand. It was no accident. It was a test. And somehow, Daniel had passed. Over the next week, the visits became routine. At first, Daniel thought it was coincidence, that the mother bear and her cubs just happened to linger near his cabin. But soon, he realized it was something far more deliberate. Each morning, just as the fog lifted from the valley, he would find the bears waiting at the tree line. At first, Daniel left food at a distance, careful not to step too close. The cubs would scramble over the grass, fighting playfully over each piece of bread or fruit, their soft growls more like purrs than threats. The mother bear always stayed behind them, her watchful gaze locked on Daniel. Then, slowly, the distance between them began to shrink. The cubs grew bolder. One morning, as Daniel laid down his offering, a tiny cub approached before he could even step back. It looked up at him with wide, curious eyes, its nose twitching. Daniel froze, hardly breathing. The cub sniffed his boots before grabbing a crust of bread and running back toward its siblings. For the first time in years, Daniel laughed out loud, a sound that startled even himself. But the real shock came days later. As he sat on his cabin porch, drinking tea, the 3 cubs ventured closer on their own, rolling and playing only a few feet from where he sat. Their fur glistened in the sunlight, their small claws scratching at the wooden posts of his porch. And the mother? She didn't stop them. Instead, she lay down at the edge of the clearing, her massive body stretched comfortably against the earth. Her eyes, though still sharp, no longer held suspicion. They held something else, something Daniel struggled to believe possible in a wild animal. Trust. For a man who had lived so long in solitude, the feeling was overwhelming. Each day, the line between man and beast seemed to blur a little more. What had once been fear was now replaced with an unspoken bond. The forest was no longer silent. It was alive, with laughter, with trust, with something Daniel never thought he'd find again: companionship. Word of Daniel's strange friendship with the bears spread quickly through the nearby town. At first, it was whispered as a rumor, an old ranger gone soft, feeding wild animals as if they were pets. But when a group of hikers passing through the valley witnessed the cubs playing near his porch, their stories fueled both fascination and fear. "Daniel, you're out of your mind," one villager warned when he stopped in town for supplies. "A bear is a bear. One day, she'll remember what she really is, and you'll be the first to pay the price." Others weren't so gentle. Some suggested reporting him to the authorities, claiming that encouraging such behavior would only make the bears dependent, or dangerous. The doubts wormed their way into Daniel's mind. At night, as the wind rattled the windows of his cabin, he asked himself the same questions. Was he playing with fire? Was this bond real, or just a dangerous illusion? Then came the storm. One evening, black clouds rolled over the valley, and rain fell in sheets. The wind tore through the forest with a force that made trees groan. Daniel secured his cabin, expecting the bears to shelter deep in the woods. But through the howl of the storm, he heard it, a desperate high-pitched cry. He grabbed his lantern and stepped outside. There, near the edge of the clearing, he saw the 3 cubs huddled together, shivering in the downpour. Their mother was nowhere in sight. Without thinking, Daniel ran to them. He carried the soaked cubs one by one onto his porch, wrapping them in an old blanket. Their small bodies trembled against his chest, their fur dripping water onto the wooden floor. As lightning lit up the sky, Daniel caught sight of a massive silhouette at the tree line. The mother bear stood there, rain cascading off her fur, her amber eyes fixed on him. She didn't move forward. She didn't growl. She only watched, silent and still. And in that moment, Daniel understood, this was no accident. She was letting him protect her young. Spring arrived in the valley, and with it came warmth, sunlight, and new growth. The cubs had grown noticeably larger, their clumsy antics turning into confident explorations of the clearing around Daniel's cabin. The mother bear, once cautious, now spent long hours observing from a distance, always keeping a watchful eye on both her cubs and the man who had proven himself trustworthy. One morning, Daniel prepared his usual breakfast: dried berries, nuts, and a piece of bread. As he stepped outside, he froze. The mother bear was closer than ever, her eyes soft yet sharp, waiting. The cubs tumbled around her legs, squealing in playful delight. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct screamed caution. Yet something about her gaze, steady and knowing, told him it was time. Slowly, he laid the food on the ground, stepping back. The cubs approached immediately, sniffing and nibbling, while the mother stood silently nearby. Then, in a breathtaking moment, she did something Daniel never imagined possible. She turned her massive body, her fur glinting in the morning sun, and walked a few steps away, leaving her cubs completely under his supervision. His heart pounded in disbelief. The ultimate test. She trusted him with her most precious treasures, her young. The cubs, sensing the change, frolicked even closer to Daniel. One of the smaller ones gently brushed his leg, another climbed onto a rock to get a better look at him. He laughed, tears of all welling in his eyes. The mother bear lingered, scanning the horizon, returning occasionally to ensure all was well, but she never approached. Her trust was absolute. That day, Daniel realized the depth of the bond. It wasn't just curiosity or a fleeting habit, it was a connection born of respect, patience, and courage. For the first time, he felt that he wasn't merely an observer of the wild. He was part of it, a silent partner in a fragile, extraordinary relationship. And in the quiet moments of that morning, with sunlight dancing through the leaves and the cubs playing joyfully around him, Daniel knew this memory would stay with him forever, a testament to what can happen when fear is replaced by trust. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between Daniel and the bear family deepened. The cubs grew stronger and more independent, venturing farther into the forest yet always returning to the clearing near his cabin. The mother bear, once wary, now regarded him with quiet respect, a presence that was both protective and understanding. One crisp morning, Daniel noticed the cubs exploring the far edges of the forest. Their confidence and curiosity were unmistakable. The mother bear nudged them gently, signaling it was time to embrace the wild on their own. Daniel felt a pang of both pride and sadness. He had been entrusted with something extraordinary, and now it was time to let them go. He knelt on the porch, watching them disappear into the trees. The forest seemed to hum with life, echoing the trust, love, and patience he had shared with these wild creatures. The mother bear lingered a moment longer, locking eyes with him one last time before vanishing as well. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the experience settle in his chest. In the solitude of the wilderness, he had learned a lesson no book or lecture could teach. Kindness, respect, and patience can bridge the gap between humans and the wild. Trust, once earned, can create connections that defy fear and expectation. As he returned to his cabin, sunlight warming his face, Daniel smiled. He knew that somewhere in the forest, the bears thrived, carrying with them a memory of the man who had dared to be gentle. And he, in turn, carried with him a story of trust and wonder that would remain in his heart forever.